Okay, so today we're going to talk about propaganda, the art of persuasion and manipulation. Now, generally, when we think of propaganda, we think of it all in a very negative sense, and it doesn't always have to be, but propaganda is information of a biased or misleading nature used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. So we see this most often in politics. During war times, we see a lot of propaganda promoting our involvement or uninvolvement in a particular war. We also see this a lot in advocacy posters, as well as other nonprofits who are trying to persuade us to participate or support a particular point of view, and a lot of times in advertising. That's probably the most prolific part of propaganda is in advertising. So I'm going to use some advertising and some other political posters and advocacy posters to demonstrate some of the main elements of propaganda. So here we go. The very first one is assertion. It's an enthusiastic statement presented as a fact, though it doesn't necessarily have to be true. So consider a lot of modern advertisements. For instance, here we have the old Wheaties box with Muhammad Ali, the Breakfast of Champions. And then further down on the box, you see Fueling American Champions for decades. Both of these are assertions of something that's true. Now we know that, logically, we know that the Breakfast of Champions probably isn't true for all athletes, and it probably isn't necessarily true for all the athletes that they put on their box. But they state it so sincerely and so emphatically that people tend to believe it. Now, the other element that they use here that I didn't talk about specifically was that they use an appeal to authority. They're putting famous people on the boxes to make it seem like these people also believe that it's the Breakfast of Championship, that somehow eating Wheaties in the morning, and we don't know whether they did or not, but the eating Wheaties in the morning somehow led to them being the top athletes in their sport. Here's another case of assertion. A fact being repeated. We saw this fact repeated several times by many senators, President Obama and a couple of others, but 90% of climate papers stating a position on human-caused global warming agree that global warming is happening and we are the cause. Now, if you try to go back and look up where this 97% came from, it gets a little bit muddy. And I'm not going to go into all that. It gets into a lot of political back and forth and a sort of misrepresentation of where the data came from. But that again goes to the point of propaganda. This number, 97% of scientists agree about this, got put out there, and it got repeated and repeated by people in authority as if it was a complete fact. And if you do a little bit more research, it's a little bit hard to ascertain what is actually fact about it. Now, our second appeal is what we call bandwagoning. This is a fallacy. If you remember, going back to our logical fallacies, bandwagoning is when you try to convince somebody to do something because everybody else is doing it. So this works particularly well in propaganda because we as social beings want to be part of the larger group. So you want to be part of the crowd, you don't want to be left out, you want to be on the winning side. And it also appeals to our social status, where we fit into the hierarchy of American social structure. So this we is very important here, up here at the top, and you'll see this used in a lot of propaganda. They say we as if putting it in that first person plural makes us all part of the group. And if you disagree with it, then you're an outlier, an outsider. And nobody really wants to be that. So it really appeals to our sense of wanting to be part of the group. This was a propaganda poster from World War I. Well, step into your place. And we see here a long line starting up here and coming all the way down here of military personnel. And then we start to mix in civilians, and we get back here into more of our civilian crowd. The implication here is that we all have a place behind our military and supporting our military. And if you're doing your duty, you will step into line and support them wholeheartedly. Now, whether you agree with a particular war or whether or not you agree with the way that it's handled, you may or may not feel like stepping into line that way. But that's the part of the propaganda. It makes you want to feel like part of the group, and if you decide to step outside of the lines, then you are somehow doing a disservice to your country. Card stacking. Again, back to one of our logical fallacies, but it presents information in a positive light while admitting any other sort of information. So it's basically only telling you part of the story. This was a poster put out during Operation Desert Storm. She's glad he's there, are you? The implication here is that our troops were there to save and take care of civilian children, and that they were safer with us there. That certainly wasn't the whole story, as it isn't with any war, but it appeals to our emotional sense. Using children in propaganda posters is fairly common because they're young, they're innocent, we want to take care of them, and nobody wants to put children in harm's way. And so the appeal of the poster is that we're taking care of children, which may or may not be true, but you would be hard-pressed to find someone arguing that we shouldn't be taking care of children. Maybe a little bit less controversial, but still along the lines of card stacking. Here's two pictures of Verizon Wireless and AT&T and their coverage areas. This is a little bit old for a poster, but bear with me. This is what it used to be. 5 times more 3G coverage. The comparison is based on square miles covered with 3G voice and data services available outside 3D coverage areas. So, it doesn't necessarily just cover where that network covers, but where you could possibly get service based on other people's network services as well. So, this may or may not be a very fair comparison, but it's only showing a positive light on the Verizon coverage. Glittering generalities. This is using words that have positive meanings and are linked to highly valued concepts. So in the US, highly valued concepts would be ideas like freedom, liberty, justice, pursuit of happiness, all highly valued concepts in our society. Donald Trump ran on his campaign on the idea of make America great again. You'd be hard-pressed to find an American that doesn't want America to be great. So it's the glittering generality links the two together. It makes you think that if you want America to be great, then that is linked to Donald Trump and his campaign and his presidency. It often demands approval without thinking and uses these buzzwords. So if I were to say that liberty and justice for all was linked to, say, the Statue of Liberty, and we decided to tear down the Statue of Liberty, many people would have a problem with that based on the idea that we're tearing down those ideas of liberty and justice for all, even though the two aren't necessarily linked. Again, we saw this poster earlier of Rosie the Riveter, the We Can Do It poster. This poster came out much later, very recently, a revised copy of the poster, we should say, where it says we all can do it. Feminism is worthless without intersectionality and inclusion. So instead of having Rosie the Riveter, which was based on the idea that white women should get into the workforce and help the war efforts during World War I and II, we now have a poster that includes women of color and minorities here in the US that would feel like they should be part of the conversation as well. The idea of the lesser of two evils. This fallacy proposes that an idea should be accepted because it's the lesser of two evils, or it's the less offensive of two ideas. Often adds blame to the opposing idea or depicts the idea as the only real option. So, in instance, this poster, when you ride alone, you ride with Hitler. Join a car sharing club today. This idea that if you weren't car sharing, which would have been a way to save gas, fuel, tires, rubber, all sorts of things that were in short demand during the war, if you weren't doing everything you could to try to save these items for the war effort, then you were actually playing right into support of Hitler and the German army. Logically, that's kind of a stretch, but it works really well as a propaganda method because, again, you're convincing your audience that there's only two options here. You're either fully committed to the American movement or you're siding with Hitler. The name-calling fallacies. The use of language or images that carry negative connotations about the opposing sides. Now, of course, we see this in political campaigns all the time. Mudslinging and negative connotations about the other person, sometimes using sarcasm or ridicule. This, if starting to outdate myself on my advertisements here, but this was a campaign ad between Mac and PC, where Mac, the cool young guy, was always making fun of PC for not being up to date and cool like he was. This is a fallacy we call pinpointing the enemy. It simplifies a complex situation by breaking it down and presenting one enemy. There's only one person or one common enemy that you have to hate. It presents the situation as very clear-cut and black and white, even though it might not be. So this is an old poster depicting the red iceberg, which would be any countries that believed in communism. So we've got Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, North Korea, East Germany, China, all communist countries that the US would be fighting against. Although, during the war, not all of these were necessarily our stark enemies, but we lumped them all together and said that not only are we fighting this war, we're fighting a greater war and a greater cause, which is the idea of democracy against communism. Plain folks. It attempts to convince the viewer that the ideas are those of the common people and that these ideas are working for the good of the common person. So this was an advertisement. Sure, we'll finish the job. Again, talking about the common man, getting his hands dirty, and taking care of business. We see this in a short video. Now, Dove turned this idea of the common person around. In their campaign for Real Beauty, they started several years ago, and there have been several different renditions of it, but this is one of their early videos for this campaign where they were trying to market their beauty projects not to people who wanted to look like stars or wanted to look like models, but real people, and showing that their products could be used by real people and that they saw real beauty in the everyday person.
Okay, folks, so grade 5 minutes, camera roll, and recording sound. Slated? Sounds great.